You spoke about the destabilization in Lebanon. Obviously, Hezbollah has non-Shiite allies in Lebanon, particularly in the Christian community. Have you seen a situation whereby they have utilized assets from that community for terrorist activity outside of Lebanon?
Not as such. The alliance with Aoun and the Patriotic Movement in particular has less to do with adherence to Hezbollah's ideology, goals, and tactics, and more to do with the fact that the Christian population in Lebanon is divided on many, many, many levels. And one of those many levels is who fears the radical Sunnis more and who fears the radical Shia more. Not describing all Sunnis as radical or Shia as radical, right? And Aoun, I think both for personal reasons and perhaps communal reasons, has made that alliance. However, we do see cases around the world where Hezbollah works with or deploys actual operatives who are not always Lebanese Shia. So, at one point, as I described in the book, the FBI was reporting that one of the most senior Hezbollah operatives, as they described him as a senior Hezbollah operative in the United States, was an Iraqi Shia in Texas. And one of the largest Hezbollah narco-terrorism cases we've had, Ayman Shuma, is Lebanese but not Shia. And this is because he is, in his particular case, a narcotics criminal, narcotics trafficker, and he's willing to do business with whoever can facilitate his business, provide the illicit banking functions and protection, which Hezbollah was very happy to provide in return for a slice of the pie. So, not Christian and not necessarily always as a member, like this Iraqi Shia was in Texas, but there are different types of alliances. And it's not just there, let's be perfectly honest, as you get into the criminal world, you can have all kinds of connections. Israelis and others have told me many times, at least historically, about different places in West Africa where Lebanese and Israeli criminals both were working together. Lebanese Hezbollah, procuring arms through networks that included Jewish, sometimes Israeli criminals, for whom it was just crime and business, and nationality wasn't a big deal.
Matt, what do you think is going to happen in Fallujah? On one hand, as we all know, the government, so-called Shia-led government, and then you have Al-Qaeda's flag on top of buildings in Fallujah. Is there a Hezbollah role in Iraq?
So Hezbollah is not involved in Fallujah. Hezbollah has had, played during the war, a very significant role in Iraq, and I have an entire chapter about it in the book. Hezbollah established an entire unit, a dedicated unit, Unit 3800, with the express purpose of training Iraqi Shia militants, some in Iraq, more in Iran, and then for elite courses, some were brought to Lebanon for training there. Usually, Hezbollah is training Shia, but not always. I think it's a lot less likely now because of the very, very sharp sectarian tensions we're seeing. But there have been multiple cases throughout the years where radical Sunnis, some affiliated with Al-Qaeda, have been trained by Hezbollah. During the July 2006 war, the UN Monitoring Committee, for example, documented that not only were many Shia militants who were being trained in Lebanon, stuck in Lebanon during the war, whether they fought with Hezbollah or not is unclear, but so were Somali Shabab, Sunni affiliated with Al-Qaeda, which is really very different and interesting. There are other cases like that. So they did have a major role. And you're seeing a lot of these same people who got trained by Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah, during the coalition war in Iraq, now coming and fighting in Syria. Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force, is facilitating, not personally, but overseeing his outfit, facilitating the transfer of these guys to go and fight under Hezbollah command in Syria. Parenthetically, by the way, it's not like these relationships only go back to the coalition war. In the coalition war, you had the reunion of people who had first gotten together 25 years earlier, in the 1980s, in bombings in Kuwait. 7 bombings in 2 hours targeting American and other interests in Kuwait, involving Mustafa Badruddin himself, for which he and others ended up in jail. Stayed in jail until the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait was freed from jail and made his way back to Iran and Lebanon. The attempted assassination of the Kuwaiti emir, they just rammed the wrong car in the convoy. 25 years later, some of these guys, some of whom appear in David Ignatius's column today in the Washington Post by name, are people that Mustafa Badruddin and one of the Muqsawi cousins were active on the ground with in Kuwait. Why was Lebanese Hezbollah and Iraqi Shia militants? Because they were doing this as an Iranian requested operation, and Iran was sending operatives from Lebanon, from Iraq, etc. Today, Hezbollah is not on the ground in Fallujah. They don't need to be because the government is a Shia government that the Sunnis believe is being way too harsh, way too firm, cracking down on legitimate dissent. And in fact, that's what appears to have happened in Fallujah. The government was cracking down on what, by all accounts, was legitimate Sunni dissent and rallies in Fallujah. They overstepped, realized they overstepped. Maliki said, fine, I'm going to withdraw the army from the city. Tribes, Sunni tribes, are already, but now really angry at the central, parentheses, Shia regime, which has gotten very close to Iran. They're already angry. Al-Qaeda guys who are outside the city see an opportunity, and they move in, partner with the tribes who don't really like Al-Qaeda, and just a little while ago were part of the Sahwa awakening fighting Al-Qaeda, but they're now really concerned and circling the bandwagon as Sunnis because they're feeling oppressed by the Shia regime, and that's what you're seeing in Fallujah. The real answer in Fallujah isn't a counterinsurgency or counterterrorism thing. It is a governance question, and it's a question of the Maliki government.
Well, thank you for the talk. Your book and your talk comes across as that we have undermined the threat that Hezbollah poses in this current state of affairs. And since you have the credentials in national security and counterterrorism, great threat presences, and if it is taken as a case that we have undermined this threat, and the people in the counterterrorism think of shifting the drone campaign to Hezbollah, wherever they are. And if it happens, then there might be questions of, well, as you said, there are legitimate political and social parties. What will be the ramifications in that?
So, I wouldn't say undermine, I'd say underestimate, right? And I think that we have for a long time underestimated this Hezbollah threat, though I would caveat, I don't think that the intelligence community has really underestimated. Within the classified domain, there's always been tremendous literature. In fact, all the more so, ever since Hezbollah targeted CIA, well, didn't target it, targeted the embassy, but took out the CIA station in Beirut, since they kidnapped our CIA station chief, brutally tortured and murdered him, Bill Buckley, and other things. This has been very personal, and there's been a constant there, but let's be honest, maybe even before, but certainly after 9/11, we were extraordinarily focused, not on Shia extremism, and this is not a criticism, I think there was good reason, on really radical Sunni extremism. Again, let's be honest, Hezbollah, they do surveillance here in the United States. I get into it in the book, FBI has talked about it, but they're not carrying out attacks on a regular basis. In fact, Hezbollah has never carried out an attack in the United States. That doesn't mean they're our friends, it doesn't mean it's ever impossible. Actually get into the book in a very sober way. Under what conditions might that happen? And I don't think it's likely. It's not impossible. But so they are different in many ways. But the public, and the public discourse, has not just underestimated, but usually completely discounted the threat. It can't be. It's just not possible. Does it make sense that Iran would support Hezbollah? Yes, actually. And the fact that people haven't been able to answer that question, I think it's because the information wasn't there, and that's why I wrote this book. I think it's a massive, massive leap, though, to get to a discussion of use of drones against the public. I don't think that's going to happen, for lots of different reasons. Hezbollah is a very, very different target. It is multiple things. It is not only a terrorist group. I think that it is a terrorist group that does other things. I don't think we can give it a free pass for those other things, for the terrorism, just because it does these other things. But I do think that we're eventually going to get to a discussion of whether or not drones are an appropriate use more largely in the Syria context. If we are using drones in parts of Pakistan, more to the point if we're using drones not as frequently, but in Yemen, a couple of times maybe in Somalia, then what's happening in Syria now, there's the greatest concentration of Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda-like groups in the world is in Syria right now, period. End of discussion. The largest controlled territory. And as I said earlier, this is not Afghanistan somewhere in the Hindu Kush far away from the West. This is on the doorstep of the West. And not just geographically, you have a huge number of Westerners, Western passport holders. We're talking almost solely, but not exclusively on the Sunni side, who have gone or are fighting in Syria, and they have every legal right to come home, and eventually they will come home. The Europeans are most concerned about this. We're a little less so, we're a little bit more on top of it, but it doesn't just stop there. I just spent some time in Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand, they're concerned about this. Australia, while I was there, they had arrests in Sydney of a cell that was doing just this, sending people abroad and bringing them home. And when they were recruiting them to go, they weren't saying, go blow up the World Trade Center, take on the West. They were saying, defend your brothers and sisters. America's not going, Australia's not going. No one is stopping this butcher and his acolytes, his coyotes, Hezbollah Shaitan, Hezbollah, from butchering your brothers and sisters. You have to defend them when they come back. Whether they intended to go and fight with Jabhat al-Nusra or Islamic State of Iraq and Levant or not, that's where they end up fighting. These are the groups that accept and they come back far more radicalized. We have had, by the way, a small number of Shia, and in fact there is at least one Australian, Lebanese, Australian, dual national Shia, who went and fought with Hezbollah and died there fighting Australian, fighting with Hezbollah. To bring things closer in some ways to the mission of the AIC, one of your missions here, something I know that we're both concerned about, law enforcement here is very concerned about it, completely separate from terrorism. One of our concerns is that we are going to see, my understanding is that while it hasn't been made very public, there have already been cases here in the United States of hate crimes between Muslim communities, between Sunni and Shia Muslim communities, and we see this historically as tensions rise abroad. Those tensions will happen in diaspora communities. We saw it, for example, when Hezbollah and Amal were fighting for dominance in the south, that tension, violent tension, started popping up, for example, within diaspora communities in Africa. So that's something we're looking at here.
Can you speak to command and control in Syria in terms of large numbers of Hezbollah in Syria? Where does the Quds, the Syrian army, Alawite generals, Shia generals, Lebanese, Hezbollah commanders, how does that break down? Or how does that play out?
So the command control in Syria is very, very fluid, which is a very Washington way of saying we don't really know. What we do know is this. The majority of fighters on the government side are not governments, are not Syrian. There's a majority now of foreigners. On the government side. Certainly the most capable. Okay. You do have government military, you do have Shabiha, you do have Syrian, mostly Alawite militias. Hezbollah, yes, they're fighting, but more and more they're commanding. Not only other Hezbollah, not only other Shia, mostly Iraqi, but others as well, but also some Syrians. And the Quds force is there to provide some of the very professional command and control capabilities, some of the logistics capabilities that you need done more professionally, supply lines, this type of thing, on that side of it. By the way, the rebels have no less, maybe much more of a problem under command and control, and it percolates to the political side as well. The political people outside of the country who claim to represent them will be going to Geneva too, are not the ones who are fighting on the ground. They do not command the people who are fighting on the ground. It's a big mess.